Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Hanging Out with Nolan Hong. And today's guest is someone that was introduced to us by a friend of the show, Arliss. And when Arliss described this next guest, she said that this person was an international award-winning keynote speaker, a podcast host, a public speaking coach, a stand-up comic, and a writer. And I was just like, this sounds amazing. I need to know more about her. So I am so stoked that she is willing to join me here on the podcast. This is the first time we've ever met, and we're going to really get to know each other. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Miss Laura Reid. Hey, Laura.
Hey, Nolan. It's so awesome to be hanging out with you, and shout out to Arliss. She always connects me with the best people, and I'm really honored to be here today.
Oh, we're stoked to have you on here, and I apologize with that weird applause thing. We're all using this brand new platform to record the podcast, and I was like all excited to have my audience clapping, and then I forgot that I turned the volume on like way too loud, and so just know that smattering applause was not because they were unhappy that you're here. It's because I was pressing the button wrong.
Oh, that's all right. Wouldn't be the first time I got it.
So, Laura, before we got into, when we first met off air, you had mentioned that you are in the Big Island of Hawaii. Is that where you're originally from, or did you move there from growing up somewhere else?
I grew up in upstate New York.
No way.
Spent most of my childhood in the Finger Lakes region around all those, lakes, Cayuga Lake and Seneca Lake, if you're familiar with that, and grew up with a lot of snow. And when I get a little bit homesick, which I still do sometimes, especially when autumn rolls around and I miss the feeling of that crispness in the air and the leaves changing color, I just think back to scraping ice off windshields and how I really don't ever have to do that again, and then I'm not as homesick.
Holy smokes. So how did you find your way from New York to the Big Island of Hawaii?
There came a point where I stopped asking what the next thing to do is and the next thing to do, where I was, and started to ask, what's the dream? What's the next dream? And a dream of mine had always been to live by the ocean. I love to be by water, and I've been by lakes, but I really, really wanted to be by the ocean. I always assumed it was just unattainable. It seemed really hard to do that. But I had turned 50. One of my main reasons for staying in New York was so that my dad could really get to know my son, Riley, and they did. They got to know each other so well. And then my dad passed. And I think when someone really close to you dies, it's this internal upheaval, but also it can be external in a way too. And through that grief can also be a gift of some kind of catalyst and a reminder that we're mortal. And I think in a way, my dad prompted me to move here and to think bigger and to know that dream was attainable.
Wow. And so, because you said you wanted to live by the ocean, but some would argue like, well, New York, you're right by the Atlantic Ocean, but you went clear across to the other ocean, right?
That's right. Yeah. And it's still pretty far. In upstate New York, it was like to get to New York City, it was a good 5-hour drive or so. And the Atlantic, it's cold. But there's something about being here. I was drawn to Hawaii. It's, we're still the United States, technically, but you have that cultural aspect. And I was really drawn to learning about the culture here and having my son experience that. And I can't really explain it. I never even visited here, but the minute that I set foot on the Big Island, the minute I set foot on the Big Island, I knew this was where I was meant to be. And my life has changed in big and small ways since then. It's been about going on 6 years now. And I'm so grateful to live here. Not a day goes by where you see a rainbow or horses here. And I'm just like, oh my God, I live here. And my son's like, settle down, Mom. It's been some years now. But I'm still just in awe that this, I get to be here.
Well, you can tell your son that I've been living here for, 40 plus years, and I still do the same thing that you're doing. So, tell them
Yeah.
it never goes away.
Ah,
You don't lose
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What
Absolutely.
was it about? So, as far as you said that you thought it would never be attainable, and then when your dad passed, it kind of changed things. What can you point to specifically that changed for you, where you said that this dream of living by the ocean was attainable? What changed it for you specifically?
Part of it was I think I was ready for an internal change with myself as well. I grew up with a severe stutter and extreme public speaking
Wow.
fear, social anxiety. I mean, I'm still 100% introvert, but that's always was how I grew up. And a lot of people who grew up with a stutter, if any of your listeners have grown up with a stutter, they might understand this, that there's a safe zone sometimes with who you can be fluent with your speech around. A lot of times it's an animal, like a dog. We can talk to dogs and not stutter. There's a lot of famous actors who stutter, so for them it's the stage. For me, it was being a teacher and of children. So for whatever reason, when I was in front of children, I could be really fluent. So I went and got my master's in education. I studied Montessori. Education really spoke to me. So I opened up eventually, after working at Montessori schools, my own Montessori school in upstate New York and taught children for many, many years. And eventually it occurred to me, as much as I love that, uh, it was still in that safe zone for me. And that there was something else. There was something else I was meant to do. When I was around adults, I still would get nervous, like parent teacher conferences, even of my own school. I would get nervous speaking to the parents, but fine with the children. By happenstance, I walked by a flyer for a storytelling competition. And I don't know if you've had these kind of really potent moments of synchronicity in your life, but it's like I didn't have a choice in that moment. I knew I
Wow.
needed to enter that competition and get up on that stage. And that point really changed my life. It was towards the end of where I would own that school, and I was looking for something new to do that would challenge me in a new way. And I got up on that stage. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done. Of course, I've had years of speech therapy and studying, for myself how to overcome the public speaking fear, but it still was pretty potent in me. Got up
Yeah.
on that stage, told my story. I won that competition, so it really added to my confidence.
Wow.
But more than that, it was all the people that came up to me afterwards that were just so like they related to my story, and I had touched their lives in this really small but meaningful way, it seemed like. So because of that, I decided, you know what, I think I want to do something new. I want to be some kind of coach to people, and went through a life coach training institute, and all these different learning tools, every self-help book in the world I think I've read by now. um, and that brought me to start a new career here as well. So it's really, I think when you say specifically, it was tied to that, like that element of wanting to live somewhere new and reinvent myself and my purpose in this new way.
Wow. And when you entered this speech competition, how old were you?
Oh, well, it wasn't really that long ago. So I think that
Oh,
was,
really?
yeah, I think that was maybe about 10 years ago or so, something like that. It was around when my dad's health was still failing, and I decided to do that. I never had the guts to do any of that before that point.
Yeah.
But I'm a public speaking coach now, so
That's
I'm
incredible.
really unlikely speaker, but this is what I love. Now you can't get me to shut up now. That's why I'm here. So
That's so interesting because a lot of people, they think that, oh, I have to figure out what my life's purpose is and whatnot, and we kind of tend to feel like you figure it out and then you stick with it the rest of your life. And we used to get, I used to get in a lot of criticism because I used to keep changing my careers, growing up from my 20s all the way to now. And it was almost like a sign of like, oh, you're not disciplined, or, you're just not focused. And I always felt like, no, I feel like every step or every career that I took was, it had its purpose, and it helped me move on to the next thing. And so for you to find something that you're so passionate about now in this stage of your life, but it's so far from who you thought you were 10, 15, 20 years ago, that's really incredible. Was that something that you felt was like, did you almost feel like, I wish I'd started this earlier? Or was this like, no, this is perfect timing for me to jump into this stage of my career?
Well, I think back to former careers that I had. I'm like you. I kind of
Yeah.
hopped around all over the place, and I think back to some of them and just think if I had had the confidence, not really even confidence, but more just a belief in myself. You know, if I had that trust and belief in myself 30 years ago, like how different some of those careers might have turned out. You know, I
Yeah.
get asked to speak at events and conferences. I'd always turn it down. I could barely get through a staff meeting without a panic attack of having to just
Oh, wow.
introduce myself. So I think back to how things would have gone differently. But like you said, there's a purpose for where you were in that part of your life. You know, and I have no regrets about any of those stages. They all led me closer. And one day I might look back at this stage in my life and know that, oh, that led me closer to this other thing that I end up doing. So I do believe there's almost like a thread that weaves all of those experiences together to bring you to where you are. And we never really get there, you know, to like this ideal version of our best selves, whatever that
Yeah.
is. So you might as well enjoy where you are along the way, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people, when they see someone like yourself at this stage where you're, coaching, and you carry yourself with so much knowledge and confidence, and we just assume like, oh, that's someone who was born with it and they're so talented, like I can't do that. But to hear that where you came from, I was just curious, what can you describe what it was like for you when you were like dealing with your stutter, and dealing with the anxiety of and fear of public speaking and all that? Just because I feel like a lot of people who don't realize where you came from can see that maybe it's not as far of a stretch for them to get to a point of comfort or the position that you're in, where, because I love that you're a public speaking coach, because I feel like that's such a powerful skill and tool that I think everyone has the ability to achieve. But so many of us, because public speaking is like the number one fear in the world,
It
that so
is.
many people just think like, that's not in me, there's no possibility. Yet hearing you just briefly describe where you came from, it's like, oh no, if Laura can do it, then anyone can do it. So yeah, what was your life like in living with, the stutter and with this fear of public speaking?
Yeah, in short, it was exhausting. I think
Mm,
any kind of phobia that you might have, whether it's public speaking, that yes, I think 78% of the population has a fear of that,
yeah.
all over, some more extreme than others. I would say mine was a very much an extreme fear of it. But no matter what you're afraid of, it can start just to drain your energy. So even as a child, I think it was exhausting to live with that constant fear of being put in a situation. I still recall so vividly in my mind being in the classroom in maybe second, third grade, and we'd have to go around the room taking turns reading a paragraph. And I would try to I try to count, how many more children were reading what paragraph before it got to me. And then so I could figure out what the paragraph was I had to read and determine if I would be able to do it or not, kind of silently practice in my head. Like just that, so much anxiety, so much, the stress at a young age. And of course, it would start with a word that I convinced myself began with a syllable that I could not say. Like I just, no matter
Oh,
what, like I would just, it'd be the same scenario over and over. And that played out, into my adult years. I got really good at hiding my stutter, like really good at it. I love words, right? I'm an English major too, and so a big vocabulary. But part of that feeds my bad cover up for my stutter because I could switch a word in my mind really quickly to one that I have convinced myself I can say rather one than I couldn't. But living that way it's a terrible way to live. The word that I, I could not say no matter what, I told myself, was my own name. And
Interesting.
that is, it turns out that's a very common thing with a lot of people who stutter. I've been on a lot of stuttering forums, and one woman, I can relate to this, even though it sounds so crazy. She actually changed her name because she was convinced
Wow.
she couldn't say her name without stuttering. I used to wear name necklaces. So I told myself that if I was in a situation and I thought I couldn't say my name in front of someone, I was to the point of hiding it to this, this extreme where I would kind of make it like a joke and just like point to my name and they'd say it first. And sometimes if they said it first, I could say it. In short, it's really, really exhausting way to live. I had a speech therapist until through really the sixth grade. And then it was mostly practicing on my own, trying to figure out ways that would work for me. A lot of what really works for me with overcoming public speaking fear, and I still get nervous, absolutely. I've tried out. I know it works, but it's not a lot that you will find, a lot of techniques that you'll find out there. So I love helping my clients in ways that I know really, really work, right? Like imagining your audience naked. No, ew, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's so distracting.
It makes it even more uncomfortable, right? Like,
I'm very uncomfortable for many reasons. But yeah, so I'd like to try more, sustainable methods that I know have worked for me. And but it's a journey. I'm never. I might appear confident, but inside, I still definitely get nervous. I still get blocked on some words now and again. But most, I try to hide right who I was. But the breakthrough really, I think, was in accepting it and realizing, not only accepting what I saw as this almost like a disability I'd grown up with that no one saw or knew but me. And I didn't want them to know it. When I did stutter, I was so ashamed. So not only accepting it, but starting to love it in some ways, like love that dark shadow part of myself that I'd hidden from everyone else. That was really a breakthrough for me, and realizing how because of that, I'm able to serve in the way that I do. And if I hadn't grown up with that, I wouldn't.
that's so powerful because I think a lot of the things that I've realized in life is that you can take two different paths in dealing with something that could be perceived as a difficulty or a tragedy or whatnot. And you could take it as like, oh, why did this happen to me? And oh, I can't do anything because this has happened to me. Or you could go the route that you did, which is I got this because I need to use this to get me to where I'm supposed to go, and appreciating it. How did you learn to make that decision? Because that's a difficult way to think, and seeing something that was embarrassing to you, that you were afraid of, that to make that switch and go, oh, I love this part of me. Like, what was there something specific that you were able to do to make that decision?
Yeah, I think there was. And you reminded me of that. I think it's Albert Einstein that said you either see everything as a miracle or nothing as a miracle. That there's two types of people. So I think
Yeah.
for me was, yes, seeing it as a miracle, as a gift in my life, tied to my story. So when I got up there on that stage, that storytelling competition, I wrote about and I spoke about having that stutter and a pivotal moment of finding my voice. And for most people, it's finding your voice. It's very metaphorical. And for me, it was this very literal moment
Yeah.
where I finally stood up to who in many ways was like the villain in my life, kind of evil stepmother that I grew up with for a while. And it was standing up to her with using my voice in that way. And I told that story on stage, and so that got me to start proving to myself that the story can be relatable to other people. And that because of that part in myself that I tried to hide, I was able to, in a way, be more courageous, because I could accept it and power through it to have my voice. And it was so much more meaningful when I used my voice then, because I was breaking through so many obstacles internal, that I had to try to find it. I also started reading and studying about Carl Jung and shadow work, and how we all have this inner dark version of ourselves. And usually it begins forming when we're very young and someone says something to us that, it starts to kind of trigger that self-doubt and shame in us. And then, of course, as we grow, it grows. And so the time we're adults, we hardly even are in touch anymore with who that originally was, that true self. It's been so overpowered by the shadow version of ourselves. So I did some internal work to get in touch with that part of me, which turned out to be, you can start to kind of visualize who that is, what it looks like, your shadow self, if it took on a living form. And that was really powerful work to have that transformation. When I first saw my inner shadow, it was just this ugly blob monster, like the 1950s movie, The Blob. And I think that's what I imagined as a child was stuck in my throat. Like I imagined there was a literal, a monster in my throat. That's what it would feel like. And when I would try to speak, it would eat my words and take my breath, and my face would turn blue, and I had to stomp my foot to try to get a single word out. That's what I imagined it was. But as I kept doing the work, it turned into just a scared child version of myself. And when I would go in and see that version of myself and tell her that I love her and she's safe and her voice is meant to be heard, her story is meant to be heard, that's when the healing, kind of an internal shift and healing, began to happen.
Wow. You described that, the sensation felt almost like, a blob eating your words and such. When you're growing up with this, can you describe what actually is happening? Is it that you can, because the way I think about, speaking is I formulate the thought in my head and then I verbalize it out. So is it that even that the thought is clear in your head, but just that there's a disconnect to what comes out of your mouth? How does that affect you?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Here's the thing about stuttering. There's so much mystery to it even now. There's a lot. I think there's a preconception that people stutter because they're nervous or anxious, but that's not really the case. It can come up really unexpectedly. And as I said, it's not because we physically can't, biologically can't speak fluently. Like I said, a lot of actors, can speak on stage. A lot of stutterers are, famous singers and they can sing fine, or speak to, their dog without stuttering. So you can. It is something just comes up out of the blue, and that word, there's a block, we call it a block. And it's kind of inexplicable. Even now, every once in a while I'll get it and I'll be oh yeah, I remember you, because it's so much less. But when, 15, 20 years ago, it would come up maybe every third word. Right. So and people might not even notice, because I did get really good at hiding, where it'd just be maybe a little bit of an uncomfortable pause. And I used a lot of methods that I've taught myself to still get that word out, or like I said, switch the word, little tricks. But it comes up really unexpectedly, and it's it just sucks your breath away. But there are situations where, people have different types of stutters. And there is a lot of science that would point to it being hereditary. So, for example, my grandfather, I found out, had a stutter. My father had a stutter that it was more prominent when he was young, and he kind of grew out of it, more or less, I would say, but it would still come up every once in a while. My son has a stutter. And he's had speech therapy, in his early childhood years. He's 17 now, and it still comes up. for him though, it's so different. Like he doesn't have a lot of seem to have shame around it, and he just
Hmm.
lets himself stutter and gets through it. Right? He'll just repeat a word over and over until it gets out. And that's how he does it. For me, I had so much shame and embarrassment around it. I would let my face just turn blue. I would run out of the room if I had to. I
Oh,
would really want to hide it from everyone. And I love that he's okay with it. As his friends know, and they just let him do it. And yeah, so it's really mysterious. Yeah.
do, is his comfort? Does that come from you being able to relate and that you were open with explaining it to him, or was it just something that he was that's his personality he was born with, and it's kind of a
Yeah.
blessing in that how he's just been able to take it and run with it.
I think it's his personality. He's just this like laid back kid. Maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's the schools here. And, after especially moving to Hawaii, people are extremely accepting of each other. He was never bullied about it. I know I was bullied about it when I was a child. And I think that does
Mm.
make a difference for sure.
Yeah.
So I think that might be part of it, but I admire him so much that, and he speaks up all the time. Every once in a while, I think there's a class where he really won't stutter, and I'll have that parent teacher conference and they have no idea, and then other times it's
Interesting.
really prominent. So it kind of comes like seasonal and waves, and I think everyone's stutter is really unique and different for them. But I would love everyone to know that if you do struggle with that, to kind of accept it, to love that part of yourself, even though you're trying to hide it away, and that there
Hmm.
is so much good help out there for it. And just giving yourself a breather and a breath with whatever works for you, whether it's singing or acting or, speaking to yourself when you can, to give yourself those breaks of fluency so you're not, always in that block and exhausted by it.
Yeah, and you said that there are a few different techniques and such, and would you say that everybody has different will respond differently to techniques that work for them, and so it's just a matter of taking the time to learn what's out there and see what works best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of speech therapists out there, professional therapists. I'm not a professional therapist that way. I help more with just overcoming the fear and crafting your speech and your story and all of that. But some of the therapies they have, I do think work pretty universally because a lot of it is just breath work, just when, like I said, my face would turn blue, to reminding yourself to breathe. Slow onset of syllables can really help, almost like you're singing. When I did start doing more public speaking and getting up there and doing speeches and more storytelling events, it was funny because a lot of the feedback I got was, oh, your voice is so, you have this cadence and it's like you're just singing a song. And it's funny because that was my therapy. So that's how I really learned to speak. Even though my singing voice is not so great, it was like it would help me to think of speaking as a song and just make it melodic for myself and remind myself to breathe, so it wasn't so blunt and choked up in my throat.
You mentioned that you are naturally an introvert. Did growing up with this, how did it affect you in building friendships? Like going to school and even relationships with your family. Did it play a factor in that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a team sports person for this, to this
Uh,
day. I did gymnastics, I think, because that was solo pretty much.
mhm.
And to this day too, I was thinking about it. I've always gravitated towards having maybe a few really close friends because for me, it's more comfortable to have meaningful one-on-one conversations like we're having, than to be in a networking event where I
Yeah.
I'm, a little overwhelmed. There's 200 people in the room, like got the name tag and I'm just dying on the inside. So it definitely has affected me a lot and I need those times of solitude. I desire that so much in my life. I make a point to
Mm.
build it in as much as I love being with the people I love, being I've always been my own best friend. Like I've had, got my own back, right? And I think that was a survival technique, perhaps growing up. But it's still with me now, where it kind of helps me recharge my battery. That said, I love helping other introverts too. I have some workshops and classes I've done on networking for introverts because I've had to for just to survive that room, and I'm in all kinds of networking groups to survive the room and still make it enjoyable for myself. I've had to come up with some strategies of how I can do that and try to have fun. So.
Yeah. Not to give away your whole uh, workshop, but is there something that you would be able to give us a little nugget? Because I have that is my biggest I guess barrier. Like I feel the same way that you do, and even if it's a room full of like 4 or 5 people, but if they know each other already, and I'm walking in as the new addition, I'm
Right.
like, I'm just gonna sit in the corner here, and if someone talks to me, then I'll speak. But I feel so awkward and uncomfortable. Like I don't want to interject myself into people's conversations, and it's such a difficult thing for me to figure out what to do, and I end up just looking either like an uncomfortable, awkward person, or they may diagnose me as like I'm stuck up and I don't want to talk to you kind of thing. And it's more, it's like
Yeah.
I'm so afraid to say anything right now.
Yeah. Well, you're putting that label on yourself right now, uncomfortable, awkward person, right? So
Yeah,
you're kind of turning the mirror of that room on yourself. And I
yeah.
think the most important thing is to, because I believe everything's a mirror, we're reflecting that. So you're reflecting that back out, that version of
Mm,
yourself. So if you turn that mirror around to face everyone there and you put your focus on them,
hmm.
I come up with a bunch of great questions that I know I can ask someone else and know that it's not really going to be about me. I am going to go into that room and really, I can't wait to hear someone else's story. So it's about asking that person some questions that will open them up, and 3 magic words: tell me more about that. And the more that I can connect with that person, when they do ask me a question, the more comfortable I already am. But I try to just reflect it back on them. That said, I think lowering the bar is a great thing. Like, so instead of telling yourself you're going to connect with all these people or you have to make
Yeah,
that successful, instead it's like two people. If I can speak to 2 people and connect with them, then I'm done. I'm kind of off the hook. I'm gonna grab a cup of coffee and a croissant, whatever it is. That can really help. But for public speaking and for networking, is it okay if I share what I think is the most transformational thing I've learned?
please. I
Okay.
need to
All
know
right.
this.
And you're not going to hear this anywhere else from me. I invented this and it goes against, sorry, Oprah, like being, living your best life and, seizing the day, all of those things. It goes against, I think, most of the self-help and memes that you'll see out there on social media. Okay, let me ask you this, Nolan. How do you feel when you are in your comfort zone? Like your ideal comfort zone, Netflix and chill or whatever it is.
uh, I feel comfortable and relaxed.
Comfortable and relaxed. Yes. I think most of us, when we're in our comfort zone, feel like we can just be ourselves, right? We're relaxed,
Hmm.
we're peaceful. So, why are we living in this society where we're so pushed to break out of our comfort zones on a daily basis? And we're
Yeah.
told continually that if we don't break out of our comfort zones, we're somehow not living our best life and we're failing in all ways and we're not going to grow as humans. What I believe is that we can stay in our comfort zones and simply expand them out to uncomfortable situations by telling our brains, like when we say, I'm breaking out of my comfort zone, right? Like, how does that
Yeah.
make you feel? Like a
It's
little,
scary. Yeah.
it's scary, right? And so our brains hear that, and they're going to go into that fight or flight mode, and something called the nervous brain kicks in. And when we have the nervous brain, it prevents us from remembering what we're going to say. So it's a terrible thing to tell ourselves to break out of our comfort zone to go give a speech because we're going to probably forget our words. That's when we tend to freeze up and choke. all those nervous symptoms set in that we all are familiar with. But when we're in a relaxed brain state, like we are when we're in our comfort zones, we could probably rehearse anything, right? We can just be ourselves, feel peaceful. We're going to remember our words. We're not going to have all of those symptoms come up that we're familiar with. So what I would recommend is before you go into that networking room, or before you give your talk, your, 45-second commercial or 45-minute speech, to tell yourself, instead of being like confident and I'm going to rock it, I'm going to break out of my comfort zone, to just simply be relaxed and calm and set an intention to be who you are and stay in your comfort zone while doing that scary thing. So that's what that has been a game changer for me.
That makes so much sense. And I love how you explained that, it's people saying, oh, get out of your comfort zone. It's such a challenge and a daunting thing when I hear that.
Yeah.
But when you said, just relax and be yourself, it's like, oh, okay, I can do that. Like that's how I am. So I could see how that is so much more reassuring and doable. And that's what, if you are yourself, then that's what's going to be authentic to the person or the people that you're presenting to. And that's what you would want. You don't want them to find out later, like, oh, here's the real me now that I'm comfortable. And it's like, oh,
Right.
there's like two different personalities. Yeah.
If you're uncomfortable, everyone is uncomfortable. That's the thing, right? Like you described yourself in that networking room. Like if you're just owning that version of yourself that you're going to be awkward, then it is going to be an awkward communication probably back and forth. But if you're telling yourself, you know what, I'm going to pretend I'm just on my couch and I'm just talking to a friend and I'm comfortable, I can just be myself, be relaxed, then that comes off too as more authentic, and it's going to be a more meaningful conversation too.
I wish I had talked to you before. I had maybe like 4 or 5 weeks ago. I got cast in a episode of Doogie Ke Aloha, and and I was so excited to meet them because I was a huge fan of the show. So to get cast was great, but I was like, I don't want to come off as like. I don't want to embarrass myself when I go backstage and meet them and such. And sure enough, when we got to the green room where all of the actors are waiting, they'd been there for hours already. And so they're all engaged in conversation. Oh. And I just sat there like, do I go up and say, hi, everybody, my name's Nolan. And they're like, hey, we're talking here. Quit, don't interrupt it. And then so I just kind of sat there and I smiled awkwardly, and kindly a couple of them smiled and said hi. And then they went back to their conversations. And I just was like, waiting for that moment to say anything, and it ended up being like a good hour that I was sitting in silence, and I just remember going, okay, that was a terrible decision, because now I'm just like, do I look at my phone? Do I look out the window? Like, what do I do? I just felt so uncomfortable. Thankfully, by the end of the night, it was a wonderful experience, and I got to meet some really great people. But for that first hour, man, I was just like in kind of panic mode. Like, what do I do? Like, I don't know what to do with my hands or where to look. It was such a scary experience for me. And they were so nice, and it wasn't that they were intimidating at all, but I created that environment because I just Yeah. Sometimes having a plan can be really helpful too. Like, yes, we're going to stay ourselves and be, relaxed and calm, but having a little bit of a plan for, here's a question I really can't wait to ask. And, how to just kind of just even, hey, I'm such a big fan. And sometimes acknowledging our nerves in that situation can be good, although I don't recommend it when you're giving a speech. But I'm so nervous right now, to meet you. That could just help kind of break that ice, but that said, it's never as bad as you think it is in your head, never, ever as bad as that. When we have those awkward pauses, we think are awkward, that we can't remember what to say. And it feels like
an hour has gone by and the room has melted around us. Like
Yeah.
it's really usually just like maybe it's 3, 4 seconds, and no one else even notices it. So you can let yourself off the hook, and I'm sure you were awesome.
I'm gonna try to keep that in mind and remember
Yeah,
that because yeah, it does feel like forever when you're in
yeah,
those situations, right?
yeah. It does. It does.
Speaking of those situations, I know that on your laundry list of accolades and
Yeah.
titles, one is stand-up comic, which
Hmm.
I'm so fascinated by because I am a huge fan of stand-up comedy and I've spent so much of my time just it's almost like not only appreciating stand-up comedy as a fan, but also I study it too. For some reason, I'm really drawn towards the creation of it, like the styles and the formulaic ways that people come up with how to connect and engage with their audience through comedy. And I've always fantasized like, oh, that would be so cool to do it, but I have no desire to do it because I know that it'll be a horrible crash and burn the first time, and I don't know if I'll ever recover from it. So I'm so curious to hear your background in how you got into stand up comedy and what this has been like for you, especially knowing now your background of you know the adversity that you went through in your childhood. Like it's just amazing that someone who's an introvert who has dealt with stuttering also is a stand-up comic. It's incredible. So
Oh,
yeah,
thank
would
you.
you mind sharing with me a little bit about this part of you?
Oh my God, it's the scariest thing I've ever done. All right.
i
It's
can
like
i can
legit scary.
imagine.
It's legit scary. Because I've been in Toastmasters for, some years. I've done, the international world champion public speaking contests, which are terrifying in their own right in a different way, and you're literally being judged. It's really
Yeah.
that's really scary. But getting up on stage for the first time, it was just about 2 years ago. It was actually on my birthday, and we had like that little bit of a lull where the world had opened up enough,
Okay, yeah.
where yeah, we were, hanging out together with masks on,
Yeah.
but still doing things like that. So it was actually, live on a real stage with real people in the audience in Kona here, and I've never been so terrified as that. But I like you were drawn to it. I was always drawn to it too, but more in this way, like that's something like I admire so much, and I can never do it. I know I could never do it. But it's that never say never thing again. And I happened to come across a woman comic, a little shout out to Justine Smith. She has a comedy production company here on Island called Dirty Girl Comedy. and and yeah, I started kind of following her and admiring her from afar, and eventually kind of like that synchronicity that I got seeing that storytelling competition flyer. It was like something had come across that she was doing some comedy, and it was like I had to reach out to her. I just had to reach out to her. So I sent her a Facebook Messenger. I'm like, hi, you don't really know me, but I admire you and you're awesome. And I'm already being awkward even in Facebook Messenger. But I think I want to learn comedy. And it was something that I really wanted to add more to my speeches, like to learn how to be more humorous
Oh,
because I admired
yeah.
that so much as well. And we worked together. I basically worked with her to be my coach. I had these ideas, and the first thing she ever told me, it just made my heart sink. I worked so hard on putting together this set to rehearse with her on Zoom and see what she thought. And she said, and I thought she was just going to be rolling laughter, and I was just going to kill it and be so good at it right away. And she was just taking all these notes, hardly laughed. And then at the end, she said, it's a funny story. It's a funny speech, but it's not stand up, and I think a part of me knew she was right. But here's the
Mm.
thing about doing comedy. It's you at your most vulnerable, raw self, getting up there. And you have to kind of suck at it to get better. It's like the only thing that, you're going to, like you said, crash and burn. You kind of have to get up there knowing that it is not going to be perfect. And if you get a couple laughs and if some things land, that's a win. But it is probably, not going to be what you want it to be right off the bat. It's not like with a speech where we can rehearse and practice and polish, and we just know, like, it builds this confidence because you never know who the audience is really going to be. Sometimes
Right.
you're drunk, sometimes it's like, and because it's not a speech, you have to deliver it in a way that's truly like being yourself. And, that said, you do need to practice and rehearse it. But when you get up there, if you're just delivering a memorized set, it's not
Yeah.
going to land. And that's super scary. I think about it,
Yeah.
and being able to really like connect with the audience in a way that, it's kind of almost spontaneous, right? And engage with them and be able to feel their laughter, know when to start again. It's such a big skill. I haven't done it in a couple months now because I've been working on some other projects, and I have a gig at my bar in Kona next week. And
Oh,
I'm so
wow.
terrified. I'm terrified about it. It's terrifying. Like, and I help people with this, but I'm gonna have to pull out all the stops to get out there on stage again. But when you do, I'm telling you, there's nothing like it in the world. Like when you can be on a stage, and it's only happened to me a couple times where I really feel like the audience is with me and
Yeah.
laughing, and we have this shared experience together. There's nothing like it, nothing like it. So that's why I do it.
Did did you feel like were there any points where you just felt like this isn't gonna work? Like because of the heartache of the, the response or going up on stage and then the audience just not clicking with it. Like did it ever get to that point where you're just like this isn't right for me, or was it more of that motivated you to work even harder at it because you knew it could get better?
Absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be highs and lows in it if you work on it, right? So
Yeah.
if you put in the energy to it and you show up with an energy, right? That's what it's really about. I think communication, it's an energy exchange. So if you're
Hmm.
showing up with that energy that's really open to the experience that is about to happen, and you're owning that, there are going to be moments that are you're going to connect. That said, yes, I did. Okay, I'm thinking back now. It's why I've really blocked this one from my mind. But I did completely bomb this one time, and I did think after that time I wasn't sure I was going to do it. And here's the crazy part about that is I'd worked really hard on this one set that I felt so good about. And I've been doing a lot more stand-up events, and I got invited by Justine to be part of this the women comics act that was going to perform at Kehilu Theater here in Waimea, where like big names have performed. So it's going to be my first, like I am in a theater on a theater type stage, and I was so excited about that night. Tons of people in the audience. A bunch of my friends were there. We had like a back room, green room with like the light bulbs around the mirror.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I just felt like such a diva. It was awesome. And I got out there that night. It was being filmed for their TV as well. And like it was good. Like I worked so hard on it, and it did make a difference. Like that the jokes landed. I loved that night so much. I was so grateful. I couldn't wait to do more. So because of that, I got invited to do this set in Oahu, to be one of the featured comics there. And it was in this, like everybody was eating. It was kind of this bar situation. There wasn't a big stage. I just thought, well, I just rocked this set. I'm going to just do the same
Yeah.
thing. I'll do the same thing I just did. And I didn't really think about who the audience was there. And,
Mm,
I just thought I could apply what I did there and just put it here, and it's going to have the same result. And so that was
right.
an amazing learning experience because right off the bat, it's like no one was really paying attention to me. And then I didn't blame the audience out loud, which I believe you should never do, right? For anything. But I did blame them in my head. I was like, what? In my head, I'm like, what? Like everybody laughed so hard at the theater,
Yeah.
which was, by the way, mostly my friends, was like, why aren't they laughing here? And then it made me forget what I was going to say next. I was just bombing in every possible way all over the place. So after that, I really didn't want to do it again, but I knew I had to. I knew I had to. And my boyfriend recorded that night, and I shouldn't remind him because he was going to make me watch it back as a learning experience. And to this day, I haven't been able to watch it back. It was over a year ago. And I'm like, I will never, I'm going to go to my grave not watching that video back. Because I know I bombed. But I got back up on the horse, as soon as I could, and really owned it and remembered to just love the audience no matter what. Love them, whether they're heckling at you, whatever it is. That is a gift to be able to be there, and just knowing who they are and connecting with them, acknowledging them, is going to make a really big difference, because it's not about the material. That's what I learned. It's not about the material. It's about your energy, how you show up.
And I gotta imagine that a lot of what helps with you connecting with your audience, whether it's stand-up or public speaking or with clients and stuff that you're coaching, that the more people feel that this is you, that you are your authentic self, that they can feel like they can trust you, and then they make that connection where then the things start to fire and resonate with them and such. Do you feel like I feel like when the pandemic hit, it kind of really escalated this movement for people feeling comfortable being themselves, because for whatever reason, it just seems like we went from an age of where you got to present yourself and be well prepared and polished and cover up your insecurities. And it almost felt like people were just like, hey, here I am, these are my, flaws and such. And others were like, hey, me too. And it just it feels like it made people feel more relatable to each other. Do you see that in the work that you're doing, whether it's through your public speaking or your coaching and such, that there is this kind of movement towards that, and that people are starting to feel that power in embracing themselves and just showing their authentic selves?
Absolutely. I think we've all been through this shared experience that was really meaningful to everyone. And I can't believe how many people I speak to whose lives have just really shifted, really changed in the past few years, directly because of the pandemic, or, sometimes indirectly in some way. People have really changed. And I think Zoom and, speaking virtually, all the, everything switching to online, I felt there was a resistance to it at first, definitely for me as well. But the good thing about it is that, we have a front row seat to everyone's voices, and people can speak from all around the world. And I think the more we realize the opportunity in that, the more we realize we can just show up. Let's just show up, have these meaningful connections. We're all a bit isolated at times. And our stories and what we're experiencing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, are more important than ever in this moment right now, that we've been experiencing the past 2 years. And I definitely felt that. I happened to, it's funny, I left, for some reason, my birthday is always like this big moment. I don't know what, but it was on my birthday, 2020. And so it was March 3rd. And I was getting on a plane at Kona Airport, and I flew to Indonesia to speak at a conference in Bali, women's empowerment conference. And I was so psyched about it. And so I left on that day thinking I'd be gone about 2 weeks. And I was called upon. They had someone drop out, because people were starting to get sick. It was just kind of this whisper at that time, but someone had dropped out as a keynote speaker in the conference that was going to happen the next week. So I was asked to take that spot, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to do that. It's going to be so fun. That's all I focused on. But when it came time about the end of the second week in March for me to get back home, guess what? Everything had just shut down. The world had just shut down. My flight was canceled. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just keep trying. I'll get another flight. I'm not going to go into this whole story, but let's just say I was stuck in Indonesia for 4 months. 4 months of my life.
4 months?
4 months. 123 days to be exact. And not that I was counting.
Holy
away from my
smokes.
son, away from my then husband. I came back kind of a different person, but while I was there in Indonesia, I had to learn how to speak virtually to still, be able to connect with people, to do these speaking events. Everything switched. I was actually in the Toastmasters big world champion of public speaking. I was in it at that time. So I had to figure out how to, give presentate my speeches for that contest at 3 a.m. at my little room in Ubud in this rice field. So it was a crazy time, but I realized the more that I could show up like myself and to share with people, like everyone, some people thought, oh, you're on this extended vacation in Bali, but it was in some ways the most challenging time of my life, too. And so being real with people, I think became very important to me. And I came back a completely different person, and my life since, not completely different, more myself. I say more myself. And my life since coming home on that day, it was actually the 4th of July, I came home, completely has changed since then. And a lot of it I can say was because of the pandemic. A lot of it was me just being more real with myself. I think that's, yeah, huge.
How does that work? Like, I just can't imagine, like when I'd heard stories about people being stuck on like the cruise ships for, docked out for like weeks and such. For you being in another country, like where did you have difficulties like getting around or communicating because it's, different languages and such? And then were they shut down too? So it's even harder to get like when we were shut down here, it was like a little difficult to, get the essentials and stuff just because you had to know like who's allowed there and how do you get that and stuff. That seemed like a lot to navigate for us being at home. Here you are in a totally foreign country. What was that whole experience like? And also not knowing, you didn't know it would be 4 months. You just, I'm sure like every day was like, is it today? Is it today? Can we go today? Right? That's gotta be maddening.
Yeah, it was crazy. But I think some of my, thank God I'm an introvert, right? And I actually enjoy my own company. I know I have my own back. I can be alone. I grew up with a lot of stress and a chaotic family situation. And I think that really helped me develop skills at that really young age to kind of adapt to new situations in a way that was going to, like, I'd always feel protected, even though everything, I have this one speech I give called the eye of the storm. It just reminded me of that, where that's how I felt my life was growing up. Like I was in the eye, and I could be calm while everything else was crazy around me. And that definitely helped me, especially when the flights kept getting canceled over and over. Luckily for me, the conference organizers, who are two wonderful Serbian men, both named Vladimir, they're, they're now forever in my life called my Vlads, and they're my brother. They were stuck too. They couldn't get back to Serbia, and they had rented a villa with multiple bedrooms in Ubud, Bali, in the rice fields, but a really isolated location. It was super cheap and seemed great. And they were like, "Oh, Laura, your flight got canceled. Just come stay here, and we'll just keep. I'm sure you'll get back in a few days." Well, long story short, like we lived together and they're my family now, but we survived that together for 3 months. And then one of the saddest days of my life, they got back home before me. And so they left me. And I'll never forget that day. I didn't have a tissue like to cry into. I remember replacing it with my towel, my bath towel, because I was crying. Like that day I felt really alone, but I'd already been there 3 months. But it was wonderful to be able to navigate it with them. The Balinese people are extremely accepting, and everything did shut down though. So that was really difficult. Luckily, they had like local farmers markets and things we could get food, but I would walk with my backpack to the local markets, fill it up with food, it'd take a couple hours, walk back to where we were. You couldn't get to by car, even only by motorbike. So it was just these, walking forever, but it was amazing. Like, I mean, I lost 40 pounds. I was like, wow.
Oh, wow.
I think most of it was sweat. But then eating, just like all we could eat was, because all the restaurants were closed. So it was just eating the like whole foods, good fruit and, vegetables, all of that. I became a vegetarian. I'm not anymore, but I did become one for a time. Yeah, that was amazing. But it became a really transformational journey, just learning to adapt every day to the culture. And some things I was really scared to do, like ride on the back of the motorbikes,
Yeah.
from the local people. That's kind of how they got around. But after about 2 months, I was like, oh, screw it. I had bought ice cream in town and I needed to get back, and the bus thing wasn't coming. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get on the back of this bike. And that was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, because I forgot, like, the streets were pretty empty. So we were just I was on the back of this stranger's bike, holding on for dear life and cruising through the countryside of Bali, and all these, ancient kind of ruin looking structures and temples.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that. So you start to break through as you adapt every day. And what you don't see anymore, like I didn't watch TV at all, any of that, you don't miss it because you're not really reminded of it. You just have these new experiences, new things. So, yeah.
And what was it like for your son? Like, I imagine, not having you around must have been tough for him.
Yeah, it was really difficult. I mean, I think he was psyched at first because it was spring break. I remember it was his spring break. When the pandemic really hit, and then the school closed, I think the second week of his spring break, and they just closed for like 2 more weeks to see what would happen. So he was just happy he got
Yeah.
this extended spring break. He didn't realize it would be extended, but thank God for WhatsApp. Like we had, we spoke on WhatsApp almost daily. But it was really difficult. It was a
Yeah.
really difficult time. Like I couldn't remind myself of how much I missed him. It's like I never thought it would be possible to miss someone that much, and that's what got me most. So,
Yeah.
luckily I had some support for a while, and I could focus on that. But yeah, thank God for technology. But on days when the power went off, I would get really. That's when like anxiety would set in, when I felt like that disconnect from home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was that often that you would lose power?
Every once in a while we would get, these lightning strikes. Like it hit the roof once and shattered the tiles. It
Oh,
was like just crazy, and crazy storms. And yeah, I would just pray to the the Zoom
oh
and internet
man.
gods when I was doing my contest, like that the Wi-Fi would stay. And yeah, it was, yeah, there was some crazy things would happen like that. And there was one day I didn't know about, and I know now, but there's a day of the year, every year in Bali, they celebrate, and it's called Silent Day. And it was introvert heaven for me. It just means you don't talk to anybody, no one talks to you. But not only do you not speak that entire day, you fast. And they cut off. I can't imagine them doing this like here in the United States. They cut off the internet. They cut off for that entire day. And
Oh
even though they
man.
didn't cut off power, you're not allowed to turn on your power. You just use candlelight that night. So the entire country is silent. And
Oh
that
wow.
was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, to be there. I experienced that with my Vlads. And I remember that night we never spoke to each other, but we sat up on our balcony. And because the entire country didn't have a single light on or speak, I, it's hard to describe the energy, but also the darkness, and just the quietness was unbelievable, except for nature. Like nature became amplified because the humans had become silent. So you just heard the
Yeah.
sounds of all the crickets. And yeah, one firefly, I'll never forget it, flew in, and it was so bright. It was like it left this trail of light as it flew around us. And yeah, I'll
Crazy.
never forget it. So I try to celebrate that holiday, still every year since then, and be silent. And it drives some of my friends crazy, but yeah, yeah.
That sounds so cool to me, but I also feel like, man, you would never be able to apply that here because I think Americans would be like, "What? Don't tell me what to do. I'm gonna
Oh,
talk what I want." Like,
there'd be so many protests.
yeah.
Yeah.
Were there? Did you know? Do you know if like in Bali, like that there are any people, whether they're tourists or whatnot, that just are, don't respect this, you know,
They're probably tourists. I didn't hear about it while I was there, but definitely the Balinese like embrace their culture, really steeped in
Oh, good.
their traditions and their
Yeah.
religion. It's a land of thousand gods, and they make beautiful offerings to the gods every morning, and they're very. It's a very kind of sacred, connected culture that way. I'm sure there were tourists that were trying to log on to their Wi-Fi and were not happy about it, like what is going on. Um, but yeah, it would never work here. You're right, but I'm really glad it worked there for sure.
Man, that's something that I wouldn't mind experiencing. It just sounds so healing and I don't know. I feel like there's just so much that could. It just sounds like a fantasy to me to have something
Mm,
like that, and to be able to appreciate that, like the way
yeah,
you described the energy that you felt. I,
yeah.
I like I could feel it just in your description. I'm like, man, that's got to be
Uh,
the coolest thing.
well, you're not gonna be able to feel it here as far as like our whole country, except,
Yeah.
but here's the thing, we have access to doing that. Like every moment, every day of our lives, we can turn off our distractions. And,
Mm.
we can decide to have those moments of silence and solitude, and really reflect on the beauty whenever we want. When I was back home here in Hawaii, and that next day, the silent day came around, I decided to honor it. I went to a beach here really early in the morning. I was probably one of the only people, and I decided I'm just going to stay all day and be silent, and this will be part of my celebration. And it was so interesting to me as people began to show up on the beach, and I got to, kind of eavesdrop on their conversations, which is one of my favorite things to do. But that day especially, I became really aware of how much we talk and how much
Yeah.
we have to fill the space, and how loud we can be, and how much of our talking is maybe perhaps unnecessary and not really meaningful. And as I listened to people, I also noticed like we're on this beautiful beach, right? And it's a gorgeous day, and there's so much complaining I'm hearing too. Complaining about
Mm.
whatever. Oh, the wind, or
Yeah.
don't my sunscreen, and oh, it's getting choppy. It's getting like whatever it is. But it just became really potent in my mind to listen to
Yeah.
everything, and just honor that day, but it was really beautiful. But I did notice, yeah, we do talk a lot as a culture.
Well, when that day comes around, I ask
I'll
that you
remind
you
you.
remind me of it so
I'm
that I can
going
join in on it
to.
too.
I am going to.
Because I am notorious for being so uncomfortable with silence, like awkward
Oh.
silence. Like so, that's why as a podcast host or
Mm.
an MC, like I'm always trying to fill in the empty spaces with
Oh.
talking, and I think I would gain a whole lot from
Oh.
doing this and embracing the silence
Yeah,
and
and you
appreciating
touched
it.
on, I just want to share real fast, one of my tips for speaking is the power in that pause and the silence. And I think
Yeah,
when we are feeling a little nervous and uncomfortable, we tend to have that default setting of filling the space with words.
yeah.
And we think that's what we need to do to kind of avoid it because we're feeling that tension. But really, those pauses are what make things, I think, really more impactful, especially when you're presenting a speech and you ask a question, let's say, to the audience. A lot of times we just start right in, but you need to give your audience
Uh-huh.
time to process that question, to answer it in their head. And pauses gives everyone a chance to catch up. And if you pause right before and after you're saying something really impactful, it just cements it in everyone's mind that much more. So, yeah, own that silence and be comfortable with it. We can practice ourselves every day through, meditation and just being silent and breathing for a minute a day. It's amazing what an impact that can have.
The rascal in me just now wanted to just not say anything and leave it. So
How
but
uncomfortable it
I
can
would,
get.
yeah, yeah,
Who's going to talk first?
yeah. That's
Oh,
funny.
I
That
will. I
reminds
will
me
break
of,
that right. I will. You're going to be. Yeah.
okay.
There's no. I will be silent for. It's going to get really uncomfortable.
I used to see a therapist, and there'd be these awkward times when she would just stare and smile at me, and I'll be like, I have nothing to, like, she didn't ask me a question and I have nothing to say. Like, what do I do? And so I would just stare and smile at her. And we'd have this, like, it seemed like 10 minutes long. And we're just like,
Oh yeah, I've been there. Well, they're
and
getting
I
paid
was
by
like,
the
what's
hour. So.
happening? What are you doing to me? You're making me crazy.
Yep.
Well, Laura, we didn't really get into what you do as far as your business and being a public speaking coach and such. So, I want to take this time to have you share with us like what it is that you offer and how, you know, some of our listeners who might be interested in what you do to help people, where they can learn more about your services and maybe you know, get into what you are putting out into the world right now. So what is it that that your company is and your services and what you're looking to do to help people?
Thank you for that. Well, I love to tell a story of one of my ideal clients that I've had for almost 2 years now. So she came to me actually to speak at that same conference where I got stuck. Like she was going
Oh,
to
wow.
speak, yeah, virtually at that. And she'd never
Mm-hmm.
spoken before at a conference, but had this opportunity and was terrified and started all that self doubt. She didn't know, she
Yeah.
didn't think she had anything really to say that people would care about. She was super nervous. She thought she'd forget her words. She had no confidence with it. And I was able to help her, you know, craft her presentation, get in touch with her message that she thinks will impact that audience and why she wants to share that message at that particular time in her life, what that gift is that was in her to release out into the world, and help her practice it, get over all those nerves, and deliver it. And at that conference, there are many speakers. I was one of those speakers. There's a coveted award at the end of that conference that goes to the best presenter of the conference, which the whole audience votes for. She won. She won
Oh,
that.
wow.
She won that award that year. And we've never stopped since. And since she empowered her voice in that way, her entire business has changed and grown. Her opportunities have grown. Her influence, her prosperity has grown a lot. I think because of that. And you know, she's a best-selling author now. And guess who that is? It's our mutual friend Arliss. So,
Oh, no way. Way to go full circle on
right?
that.
Yeah. But she's someone I like to mention because she's really one of my ideal clients where you have a sense of urgency, that something is coming up for you. You've been asked to do
Mm.
something and your default might be, oh, I can't do that. Like it was for me for most of my life, you know, that I'll never be able
Yeah.
to do that. So I love to work with people one to one, especially entrepreneurs who want to grow their business through using their voice and telling their story and the stories of those they serve more. So that is one way I work is one to one. Then I also do workshops on being able to tell your story, how to craft it. We think of storytelling as you have to be creative or be a writer, but it's actually very scientific. And I teach some really simple templates to help people, you know, get that story unleashed and out into the world. Today, actually, after this, I'm doing a workshop for high school seniors who need to do college interviews, and are really nervous about that. So that's another dreaded kind of public speaking thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is another way I work. And you can learn, I offer a free consult with me if you want to just talk story and, you know, see where you're at and how I might be able to help. You can do that. Right now, I'm right in the middle of rebranding, but my new website is speechslayer.com, where, you know, I'm going to help you kill it as a speaker. So I have this, you know, my Buffy Vampire Slayer fandom is coming to play later in my life. But you can go there. It's just a landing page right now, but it does have a free course, the seven deadly sins of public speaking, where I share my top seven public speaking mistakes that I would love you to avoid, are there. So you can check that out there, or email me directly. You know, I'm here. So,
I think what you're offering and how you're helping is so valuable and important because there's so many opportunities for people to like when you think public speaking, you're thinking, oh, I'm standing on a stage in front of a large audience. It's not necessarily the case. Public speaking can be one to one. And just like you said, like even in the interviews for college interviews and stuff, like there are so many situations where people just like, I know for myself, it's like, I wish I had somebody who could kind of coach me through this and prepare me so I can go in confidently or comfortably.
Yeah.
And
And
so to know
sometimes it's
that
just,
you can do that, it's great.
yeah, sometimes it's just giving a little pitch, like I'm in
Hmm.
Business Networking International, BNI, big networking group, and we actually had our meeting this morning, and it's 34 of us. We each get 45 seconds. Talk about very specific. You have
Ooh,
to be so
wow.
concise to tell people what you do and what kind of referrals that you want. And, so to be able to get really clear and concise with your words, I find that sometimes is more of an issue with entrepreneurs and networking, but to do
Mm,
that, you have to get really in touch with, your purpose and your passions,
yeah.
and know that every word that you say when you get to communicate with people does matter and does count. And how can you stand out in that sea of people going one to the other when we're kind of starting
Hmm.
to block them out in our minds because everyone's doing the
Yeah.
same thing the same way? I love to help people stand out, especially in those situations. Even if it's just 45 seconds, you can change someone's life, you can make an impact, and you can stand out in that sea of everyone else.
Yeah. That's so great to point out that uh, even if it's a short amount of time, that you can make an impact. Because I think, the misconception is like, oh, I don't have enough time. Like I got to go through my whole spiel and it's going to take forever. It's like, no,
No.
just a little bit can go a
Yeah,
long way.
absolutely. Yeah. With a pause, even. Yeah.
Oh, that would be the hardest one for me to learn. Well, Laura, this has been so fantastic. I just absolutely am thrilled that I've gotten to meet you. And again, thank you, Arliss, for connecting us. But just hearing your story has been so amazing. I will forever be grateful for the things that you were able to share with us as far as your experiences that I can now take with me to apply with my life. And I'm just glad that you are out there doing the work that you're doing to help others. Um, you know, I am fully on board with your philosophy and what you're putting out into the world, and I'm so grateful that this is where you are now in your life and how you're helping the world, with your experiences and your skills that you've learned. So thank you for spending this time with us and sharing with us your story. It's been really fun for me.
That means so much to me. Thank you. It's been such an honor to be hanging out with you for this time and getting to know you a little bit more too. I feel the same. So much admiration for you and what you do. Thank you for that. And yeah, it's been super fun.
All right. Well, Laura, we look forward to seeing you wherever you are next. Maybe the next stand-up special that you do. But again, your website where people can learn more and connect with you is speechslayer.com. Is that
Yes,
correct?
www. Yeah, do people still say that? Speechslayer.com. Yeah, it's just you'll see it grow. You can see it in its landing stage phase right now. And so yeah, I'd love to have you be part of that nutty family. Yeah.
Well, if it's a nutty family, I'd fit in right there. So thank you so much, Laura, and we'll hang out again soon, sometime in the future.
I'd love that. Aloha, everyone. Thank you.